All right, it is now my privilege to bring to you Miss Elena Araeo and her paper on the nature of the place of reason regarding belief in God.
Reason. You are the tipping point of man's intellect and rationality, how you dictate our thoughts, actions, and beliefs. A lack of you presents a picture of madness in the presence of a crazed state in the mind of man. Your true nature has been sought after by intellectuals for countless generations. But where is your place among those who chase after a faith in a higher being? Where does your nature insert itself in the journey of belief? Over the course of history, philosophers and theologians have sought the challenge of proving God's existence, whether it be through reason, faith, or both. Anselm, Aristotle, and Descartes are a few intellectuals who pursued the creation of a proof for the existence of a divine being solely through reason and logical arguments. Through these great thinkers, men have come to study proofs such as Anselm's ontological argument, Aristotle's cosmological argument, and even a few more. People such as Aquinas and Kant sought after a more balanced form of belief. They believed that a person could not come to belief in God simply through reason, rather that there is a part of God that cannot be fathomed by the human intellect, which provoked a need for faith. The Bible even frequently discusses the importance of faith in one's walk with God and the role that it should play in the life of the believer. Yet these questions remain. What is the true place of reason in the life of a believer? Is reason necessary to the convictions one must obtain when pursuing a belief in God? Are the logical proofs and evidences sufficient for belief? All of these complex minds provided arguments that forced man's intellect to observe the necessity of a divine being. However, there will always be aspects of God that one cannot understand or use reason and logic to fathom, because God is ultimately higher than man. Saint Anselm, a man recognized famously for his ontological argument and his work of Proselytry, undertook the challenge of proving God's existence through a simple basis of logic. Anselm's objective in the Proselytry was to prove the existence of God in a single argument, without incorporating any external sources besides that of man's intellect and logical capacity. I began to ask myself whether there might be found a single argument which would require no other for its proof than itself alone, and alone would suffice to demonstrate that God truly exists, and that there is a supreme good requiring nothing else, which all other things require for their existence and well-being, and whatever we believe regarding the divine being. He begins by arguing that belief comes before understanding. In other words, a man's belief that a supreme being exists must precede his full comprehension of how that existence is possible. One cannot come to a logical proof of a concept if one does not first take the chance to believe that it exists. For example, a man cannot seek out the existence of a unicorn or a dragon without first having faith that such animals are real. For if he did not believe that they had a possibility of existing, he would have nothing to compel him to seek the comprehension of their existence. For I do not seek to understand that I may believe, but I believe in order to understand. For this I also believe that unless I believed, I should not understand. When a man is searching for the proof of a divine being, yet begins by saying, there is no God, how can one come to an understanding of that supreme being if he does not provide his mind with the opportunity to seek the answer? Thus, one must allow the mind to believe in the reality of a certain object, being, or concept before acquiring the ability to pursue an understanding of it. Anselm claims that the ideas that can be conceived into reality are far higher than concepts that exist only in one's understanding. And implying that when an object exists in one's mind, as well as in the physical world, it must be greater than the ideas that only live within the scope of the mind. Since Anselm argues that God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived, God must exist in reality rather than solely within the scope of our understanding. With this reasoning, Anselm believed that he created a proof for God that required only the use of man's intellect. Through the sphere of Anselm's logic, reason can be held as an exclusive tool in coming to the understanding of the existence of God. The argument of the unmoved mover is one of Aristotle's most renowned theories, as it presents a logical argument for the existence of a supreme being in what seems to be an undeniable manner. Aristotle's notion for the proof of God is that there must have been a first mover in the universe due to the concept of cause and effect. Every effect has a cause. Thus, the creation of the universe must have had a first mover, and a being that was the beginning cause to the effect which created the world. This being must have been and still must be unmoved, infinite, and without a cause to create the effect of its existence. But since that which is moved must be moved by something, and the first mover must be in itself unmovable, an eternal movement must be produced by something eternal, and a single movement by a single thing. And since we see that besides the simple spatial movements of the universe, which we say the first and unmovable substance produces, there are other spatial movements. Those are the planets, which are eternal. For a body which moves in a circle is eternal and unresting. We have proved these points in the physical treatise. Each of these movements also must be caused by a substance both unmovable in itself and eternal. God must be that which is unmoved, while simultaneously existing in an eternal and immaterial form. Aristotle also argued that a supreme being must be the actualization of potentiality. He claimed that an unmoved mover could not have an essence of potentiality, rather an essence of actuality was required, or else there would be no true cause to the world, and the world could not have been created. For if a being merely holds the potential to take action and does not actualize that potential, then movement will never be set in place and it will remain only as unactualized potential. Furthermore, if a being only has the potential to set in place the movement of the universe and does not embody the actualization, then there is a possibility that the being may not have the potential at all. Thus, the unmoved mover must embody the actualization rather than the simple potential. Further, even if it acts, this will not be enough if its essence is potency, for there will not be eternal movement, since that which is potentially may possibly not be. There must then be such a principle whose very essence is actuality. Further, these substances must be without matter, for they must be eternal, if anything is eternal. Therefore, they must be actuality. Aristotle's arena of thought conveys the concept that there must be a being who is the sole cause of all other beings, and that without the existence of the first being, no other being could come into existence. Furthermore, he argues that it is necessary for actuality to be prior to all potentiality. For if actuality does not precede potentiality, then the prospect of actualization could possibly not be. To the mind of a simple yet logical man, this theory for God's existence carries itself as a sound and attainable understanding for a belief in the divine. Aristotle's first mover argument solves the common question: if God created the world, who created God? By instating a boundary line and creating the assurance of a beginning which required nothing to set it into place. Through this argument, Aristotle presented a logical explanation for the necessity of a higher being in the genesis of the universe. similar theory to that of Anselm, in the manner that he argues that God is, in himself, the true form of perfection. And since man retains a certain idea of perfection, man must receive it from a perfect being of whom nothing greater can be conceived. For nothing more perfect than God, or even as perfect, can be thought of or imagined. Man's idea of perfection had to have been given to him by a perfect being. Thus, if God is a being of whom nothing more perfect can be conceived, he must also be eternal, seeing that beings that exist in an eternal form are higher than those that live in a mere material state. Descartes argues that the concept of corporeal elements provokes the necessity of a higher being, considering that their comprehension reaches further than the human intellect allows, resulting in the conclusion that the idea of them could not have been created by the mind of man. By the word God, I understand a substance that is infinite, eternal, immutable, independent, supremely intelligent, supremely powerful, and which created both myself and everything else, if anything else there be that exists. All these attributes are such that the more carefully I concentrate on them, the less possible it seems that they could have originated from me alone. So from what has been said, it must be concluded that God necessarily exists. Just as Anselm and Aristotle, Descartes pushes to prove the necessity of a divine being through logic and the imperfection of the mind of man, as well as the perfection of God. He also claims that since man has the idea of perfection and received it from a higher and perfect being, he must have an innate knowledge of a higher being. Altogether, then, it must be concluded that the mere fact that I exist and have within me the idea of a most perfect being, that is God, provides a very clear proof that God indeed exists. A perfect being must exist for an imperfect human to retain the concept of perfection. The idea presented of the necessity of God is a way to force the logical reason for a divine being on the human mind. Thus, Descartes validates the logical state. To Descartes, when examining one's own existence and intellect, the existence of God through necessity is so evident that one can only help but conclude that there is a divine being. In the compilation of his thoughts and works called Pensées, Blaise Pascal presented the human mind with a risky argument for the existence of God, titled A Wager. He approached a belief in the existence of God as a type of bet, or casting of lots, arguing that one has more to gain than to lose by having faith. Pascal argued that reason cannot prove the existence or the non-existence of a divine being. Rather, man should use his reason to decipher how he should wager. Let us then examine this point, and let us say, either God is, or he is not. But to which view shall we be inclined? Reason cannot decide this question. Infinite chaos separates us. At the far end of this infinite distance, a coin is being spun, which will come down heads or tails. How will we wager? Reason cannot make you choose either. Reason cannot prove wrong either. If one takes the chance to have faith and believe in God, and he is indeed real, there will be a multitude of gain, such as eternal life and the promises and hope that God offers. Yet if God does not exist, one will have nothing to lose, for there will be no punishment for believing. On the contrary, if one wages not to believe and God does exist, the punishment will be severe and bring eternal suffering. And if God is indeed not real, then there will also be no punishment for a lack of belief. Let us assess the two cases. If you win everything. If you lose nothing. Do not hesitate then. Wager that he does exist. Pascal implores man to wage wisely and choose to have faith in God, since there's a better chance for gain with nothing to lose no matter the outcome. Although Pascal rejects the idea that one can prove the existence of God, he presents God in a manner which makes it reasonable to believe that he exists. Pascal sees the belief in the existence of God as a reasonable choice for man, considering that it is more logical to desire self-gain rather than self-destruction. St. Thomas Aquinas argues for the existence of God in his book, The Summa Theologica, where he describes multiple theories of logic to support a belief in the supreme being. One idea he presents is that every object or being that exists must have received the necessity of existence from something else. He reasons that if one time there was nothing in existence, since there is a world in existence now, there must be a creator whose existence holds necessity in its nature. That is God. Food must have previously existed for a plate to be necessary. For if there was a plate with the purpose of holding food, yet no food existed, then the existence of a plate would have never been necessary to begin with. Thus, since the universe exists, a divine being must have, from its nature of necessity, existed first to provide creation with the necessity for existence. Plato's theory of forms is the foundation of another concept that Aquinas presents, in which he states that everything has a maximum, or a true form, and a true and perfect form. Aquinas argues that God must be the highest form of goodness in everything on earth. Now, the maximum in any genus is the case of all that in that genus. As fire, which is the maximum of heat, is the cause of all hot things, as said in the same book. Therefore, there also must be something to which all beings, the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection, and this we call God. Just as fire is the maximum of heat, it has been concluded that since there can be observed good things on earth, God, being perfect, must be the maximum of goodness. God is the highest form of pure goodness and the only mode of true perfection. If man contains the idea of perfection in his mind and must receive it from a perfect being, God can be considered not only the limit, but the definition of perfection. Aquinas also presents the theory that everything has an end to pursue. It must have a knowledge of that end. However, there are certain natural objects or beings that lack the knowledge of their destined end. Thus, it must be given to them by a higher being with supreme knowledge of all ends. Now, whatever lacks knowledge cannot move towards an end, unless directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is directed by the archer. Therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God. Through his book, Summa Theologica, Aquinas gives various reasons why the existence of the world presents the necessity for a divine being, namely God. The arguments that he provides forces man's intellect to conclude that there is a need for God. Along with giving these logical proofs, Aquinas also claims that if a man cannot comprehend even the most reasonable evidence for God, he should believe and have faith in that which is said to be proved by such logic. The existence of God is and other like truths about God, which can be known by natural reason, are not articles of faith, but are preambles to the articles. For faith presupposes natural knowledge, even as grace presupposes nature, and perfection the perfectible. Nevertheless, there is nothing to prevent a man who can grasp a proof from accepting as a matter of faith something which in itself is capable of being scientifically known and demonstrated. Much like Anselm and his idea that one must believe something exists before seeking the understanding of it, Aquinas also argues that faith precedes reason and evidence behind the existence of God. Immanuel Kant approaches the existence of God with a phenomenal complexity, in which he tests the intellect of the mind of man and its capacity to truly grasp the intricacies of a divine being. Kant begins by arguing that one's knowledge comes only from one's own experience and intuition. However, there are truths that one's mind may have knowledge of a priori being that which does not require prior experience for one to have understanding. He claims that when a concept reaches beyond one's experience, it becomes transcendent and incapable of being comprehended by the mind. The creation of the world reaches further than one's understanding. It is outside of one's experience and a product of God's will. Thus, it cannot be explained by man's reasoning. Likewise, the cosmological ideas of the beginning of the world or of its eternity, e parte ante, cannot be of any service to us for the explanation of any event in the world itself. And finally, we must, according to a right maxim of the philosophy of nature, refrain from all explanation of the design of nature as being drawn from the will of a supreme being, because this would not be natural philosophy, but an admission that we have come to the end of it. The existence of the earth and the supreme being who created it cannot be understood within the scope of the senses and the material world. Hence, it transcends man's intellectual limit. Kant believed that having faith and assuming the existence of a supreme being is already pushing the limits of one's understanding and reason, being that God lives within the transcendental realm which exists only outside of one's experience and knowledge. He aims to eliminate dialectical illusion and the idea that man can come to a belief in God through his own reason and understanding. We are thereby kept from using reason as an attribute in order to think God, but not kept from thinking the world in such a manner as necessary to have the greatest possible use of reason within it according to principle. We thereby acknowledge that the Supreme Being is quite inscrutable and even unthinkable in any determinate way as to what it is in itself. Since man is incapable of comprehending God or his nature, man has no choice but to come to believe in God through faith, as faith does not require experience. Just as Kant reasons that faith does not present a need for experience, Hebrews 11 states that faith in God is a hope in what we cannot physically see. Now, faith is the confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. The nature of God surpasses the understanding of man, in the manner that man is incapable of fully grasping the cross, and the sacrifice that God laid down by sending his Son to die for sinners. Such an act of love is unreasonable, quite unreal, and far from any logical action. The sacrifice that God made for sinners is one that the human mind will never be able to wholly comprehend, as it races far past the human mind's ability to run. Not only the existence of God, but also his nature and his heart transcend the understanding of human man. Throughout the Bible, there are passages that discuss faith and the place that it is to hold in the life of a Christian and the process of belief in God. There are convicting stories and examples in the Bible where people have to have faith in God and in his promises, and he never failed them. In the New Testament, Paul calls the righteous to live by faith. and believe in God even when they could not see him or comprehend his plans and ways. God created man to come to a belief in him through faith. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood to be received by faith. For generations, philosophers and theologians have attempted to find a logical proof of God, using the creation of the world as a way to instate the necessity of a higher being, setting in stone the existence of God. However, the Bible declares that no one can truly fathom the creation and the manner in which it sprang into existence. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made of what is visible. God is ultimately greater than man in his knowledge, and existence is incapable of being comprehended in full by human. Even though one should have faith as a basis for one's belief, one should still examine the natural order of the earth for reasonable evidences for God's existence. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for this hope you have. Those who have faith in God should not have a mindless faith. Rather, they should have a reason that supports their faith without allowing it to replace faith as the basis for belief. Nevertheless, there are elements of God's existence and divine nature that cannot be argued for through logic. In Isaiah, God declares, "As the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." Thus, even if science or a logical argument can prove God's existence, there will always be a necessity for faith in one's belief in God. From Aquinas to Descartes, it can be concluded that reason and logic present a necessity for belief in a divine being that is God. Theories such as the unmoved mover and the efficient cause present themselves in a manner that seems to eradicate the need for faith to acquire belief in God. The natural order of the earth and the laws of motion prove the need for God to exist and set the organization of the world in place. Nevertheless, it can be evidently observed that the understanding of the existence of God dwells in a higher realm than that of the human intellect, thus compelling the need for faith in one's belief. Just as Kant argues the nature of God transcends our understanding and experience, the Bible also explains that the full understanding of God and his existence remains outside of man's comprehension. Logic and reason regarding the existence and nature of God can still be sought after by man, and can be used as a means by which man's faith is encouraged and supported. However, reason alone will never be sufficient for belief.
Thank you very much, Mr. Araeo. At the end of your paper, you took a position that seemed fairly similar to that of Immanuel Kant, that the realm of faith is beyond man's reason, and therefore we cannot really fully comprehend God or expect reason to be able to establish his existence. And yet you seem to say that the pursuit of the understanding of God with reason is still something that's profitable. Now, I'd like you to clarify your position. Is, in fact, God's existence something we can grasp with our reason? And if it is not, why would we even try to prove God's existence?
Yes. So, in my position, I think that we cannot ever fully grasp God or his nature, especially using our reason. It just is not something that our minds can comprehend. Yet there are certain reflections of God that we can see, perhaps even in mathematics or nature. And those are reflections and parts of God that we are able to grasp with our reason. So I do not think that we can grasp his nature as a whole, or even his existence, but I think that there are parts of God that are tiny reflections of a greater whole that we can definitely grasp.
Okay. All right, that gives a little better definition to how you think that proofs for the existence of God should work. And given that, within your paper, you went over quite a number of different proofs for God's existence. And I would like you to say, just in your own understanding of the proofs that you recounted, which of them do you think is most effective at giving that sort of proof that you say we can have for God's existence, and which one would you say is the most efficient?
Okay, yes. I have to say the majority of the proofs that I gave, Aristotle, for example, he was really pushing that there is a necessity for God. When you look at the world and you see that we have an earth and we see that it's ordered, and Aristotle really thought that since there was such order, there must be someone who put that all into place. And for me, I very much align with Aristotle in just the fact that he sees the world as something that has so much organization and something that is so well put together. And personally, I cannot help but look at the world and think, how could everything fall into place so perfectly? And yet we say it's by chance. I think that Aristotle definitely gave something that we as humans can grasp, but yet he fails to see the part that there is a lot more that we do not see.
Mm-hmm. All right, and which argument do you find most efficient of those that you related?
Well, for me, I would just say the unremover. I think the fact that they're just, even when I was younger, I would ask my parents, like, who created God? Or, like, how would all of this get there? But then, how would God get there? I just think that the way that the unmoved mover just puts up, like I said in my paper, a boundary to say, okay, God is infinite, and He's always infinite. That just is very compelling to say that, okay, that just provides a boundary line and says, all right, there's no more confusion there. But it's hard to grasp that. I can't put my mind around the fact that God is infinite.
All right, and last question, would you please comment on how effective you think the wager argument is?
Yes, personally, I don't think that this is an argument that we should read Pascal and say, oh, now I'm a Christian because I'm scared and I want to wager for my self-gain. I don't think that that's really that's not the heart that God is looking for belief. But to go on in life as a Christian and say, oh, I only believe because I will have gain in the end. I think that it may be effective to some degree that it would scare people a lot of times because, I mean, as humans, we really look for our own self-gain. And to have this idea that there is someone greater who could bring self-destruction, if we do not believe, is a very difficult thing for the mind to grasp or accept. So I don't think that it is effective in the sense that it would create a Christian foundation that is correct. But I think that definitely there are people out there who have definitely thought about what Pascal is talking about here. So I don't think that it's an effective form of, I wouldn't say that it's effective in the way that we should base everything off of it. But I think that people can read that or think in the way that Pascal thought and just be afraid. And perhaps they may want to grow to learn more about God and His nature, and perhaps it could lead them to a stronger foundation. salvation, but I don't think that it's a soul-affected cause in itself.
All right, thank you very much. Other people have questions?
Great job. That was some really awesome stories of life. I remember most of it. What would you say would be a good approach, looking at just your personal view, not in interviews in the paper, to evangelism? Would you take the fear tactic, the wager tactic, the there are golden streets in heaven tactic? And how would you approach someone who, let's say, has absolutely no knowledge of God, but is averse to the idea?
Okay, yeah. Personally, I think that it actually really depends on who your crowd is, who you're trying to evangelize to. Personally, I like to evangelize the idea that Jesus died for us even when we didn't deserve it. And everybody on this earth is searching for a love that can only be filled by God. And there's always going to be this empty place in their heart and in their life. And when you tell them, I have what you're searching for, I think that that's very attractive to a lot of people. But now say if you're trying to evangelize to someone who is knowledgeable in certain theologies, it's more difficult because say people who are very religious, who have a background of much knowledge of theology. It's harder to get to their heart when they have a lot of knowledge and they can have like their own proofs or their own history of knowing who God is. It's a little bit more difficult. But also, I think using reason, in our church, there is a professor who teaches organic chemistry and he was an atheist. And after studying science and just seeing kind of how Aristotle saw the world, that it was ordered, after seeing everything and how science really does prove God. And in that way, he saw reason as a way to, I really do believe in God. And then kind of led that to having a faith in God. So I think that there are just a lot of different ways to approach it. But personally, I just love to approach people with the idea that they can have so much freedom and peace.
Where did these men live, and what time did they live?
Well, Kant lived in the 1600s, as I said in my paper. Aristotle is very, very old. None of these men are alive anymore.
Yes. Great paper, I really enjoyed it. Going back to what you said about the wager argument, you said that people shouldn't come to faith because they want to gain something. So I was just kind of curious, how did you come to faith in that aspect? Because I came to faith because I didn't want to go to hell, I wanted to go to heaven. So how would you come to faith? How did you come to faith?
Well, I grew up in a Christian household, but for my own convictions and my own belief, the fact that Jesus would sacrifice so much and God would sacrifice so much really impacted me. And the fact that he loved me despite how terrible my human nature is, We are wretched people, but God knows us, knows every part of us, yet he still loves us and would give that sacrifice knowing how ugly we are or can be. So I think that for me, obviously hell is very scary to me and to a lot of people. But for me, heaven is just a reward, and getting to be with God, that's like the ultimate joy. And I wouldn't say that I came to faith simply because of what I could gain. I just saw that and it was attractive. But the fact that Jesus would sacrifice so much, I just wanted to give everything I could to him.
Would it be
Oh, sorry, did that answer your question?
Yes.
would it be an illegitimate faith if someone had become converted by just fear and they were afraid of going to hell? So they were like, all right, because I'm afraid of going down, I'm gonna try to love God. And oh wait, God says don't do this because you're afraid of hell. So you love me. So because I'm afraid of hell, I'm gonna try to do it because I love God instead of being afraid of hell. Like, is that legitimate?
So you're saying that originally, like, we were afraid, but then
Well, and they're still afraid.
still afraid, but
But
then
someone's just like, I want to love God so that I can love God instead of just being afraid of hell because I don't want to go to hell.
okay. Well, I think that a lot of people will seek after faith because they might be afraid. But if they just come to the realization that they want to love God, like you say, and they want to do things because they love God and not simply because they're afraid, I think that that's legitimate. But also, I also feel like it's not entirely my place to look at someone and say your faith is not legitimate. That's not my place. That's not my place to judge. But I would say if I knew for some odd reason, I just knew for sure that they just were so afraid, I personally wouldn't call that like legitimate. But I think that to be afraid and to want to seek more and then say, oh, I want to love God in this way, I think that that's great and that's an amazing way to come to faith. Yes.
Okay, really good job. So kind of a different question, I think, is, so you presented a lot of arguments that prove God's existence, and then also, while talking about how faith has to be the foundation. But how do we explain, so if God's existence is imprinted on the hearts of man, and it's supported by faith, how do we then explain people who come to logical conclusions that God doesn't exist? Because there are good proofs out there of that. So how do you explain that?
Yeah. There are a lot of proofs that people have come up with and given to why God doesn't exist, and honestly, to them, I would just to me, that's not what I believe, and even to see that logic, there's two logics that just clash with each other. I live in the world that I can see, and I can't help but think there must be a God. When I look at the trees, when I look at people's faces, I see God in them. We see God in everything around us. And to me, when people have those really logical arguments, that's why I say that there's a need for faith. Because just logically, it's very hard to come to this complete, okay, I only believe because it's logical. And to them, I don't think that I would, oh, he only doesn't exist because it's logical. So, I'm not quite sure, but to me, I can't help but look around and think that there's a God. So yeah, that probably doesn't fully answer your
That's
question.
okay, that
but-
was a really hard question.
Elena, you have an online question now.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Is that me or somebody else?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
All right. My question is, if man is incapable of reaching God through logic and reason, and he's only able to reach God by through faith, right?
Yeah.
Can I hear your arguments for why Christianity would be chosen over any other religion? Is it just personal choice, or is there more to choosing a religion?
I'm sorry, as opposed to, so you're saying like other religions believe in a God, and like why would I choose Christianity?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying if you can't reach God, like a God, through reason and logic, but only through faith, then what would differentiate Christianity from every other religion?
Yeah, okay, that's another question. To people who are searching for a religion or for a God, I would say that it really, you have to seek it out for yourself. You have to say, okay, is what this religion believes, maybe is that logical? Does that make sense to you? I mean, personally, my standard and my blueprint is the Bible. And for other people, that may not be. And if they seek out Christianity and they find truth, I think that's what draws a lot of people, is truth, you know? And to be able to find something that's real. And I'm not against other religions. I mean, people are free to make their own choice. And if they find truth in something else, then that's where they find truth. And, yeah.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed your video. Thank you. Very difficult and much sought after topic. So you mentioned that you think Aristotle's unmoved mover argument is the most convincing to you. Is that correct? At least out of the arguments you presented.
Yes.
Okay. So there's a fallacy called the fallacy of composition, where that which is said of the part can't necessarily be attributed to the whole, right? So if you take, for example, the phrase, every brick in a wall is red, therefore the wall is red, and compare it to something like every brick in a wall is small, therefore the wall is small. Things like that don't quite match up. How do we know that Aristotle isn't committing that fallacy when he says that everything that we see is moved necessarily means that there must be a mover as the whole? How do we know that that isn't what's going on here? And also, if not, how does it remain convincing?
Well, to just look around at the world, and even laws of physics, it's very difficult to look around and see something that moves without something else moving. And it's true for, like, I'm not going to say it's true for the whole because that was your question. But I think that when we examine it, it would be hard to find something that wouldn't move personally. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes.
I loved your paper. I knew that you would do well, and you did. I'm really proud of you. Would you say that it is reasonable or logical, I should say, to just look at your surroundings, look at nature, look at the sunset, look at everything and say, oh, that has to be God? Or could it be, there's a famous analogy called the puddle analogy, where this puddle wakes up one day and it's like, whoa, this pothole is perfectly fit for me. It must have been made for me. Whereas you can kind of reasonably understand that over the course of time and weathering, the water itself created that pothole. So do you think it's still logical to say that the earth was created for us, or was it just like natural selection or whatever creating what we see today?
Yeah. Well, personally, I think that it's very difficult to look at the order and say that it all happened. So that would have had to mean that, with the example that you're giving, that the world was at one time not equal, and to say that, I think that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because a lot of scientists or just people that study the world and study the earth, that when you look back and say a rock, say you open up a rock, or how old it is, and you see smooth lines that the ocean created, or something like that. Yeah, I think it's hard to say that, all at one time it was just a bunch of mess, and then this in order. And I think that for something to come into order by chance is just impossible.
Okay, so kind of going back to Paul's question, also beautiful paper by the way. You did really well. If truth is, from my understanding of your answer, which I might have just understood wrong, but if truth is sort of subjective and if like their religion is their own truth, is there kind of any point in trying to convert other religions if they found their truth? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, for us as Christians, I think we believe that what we believe is truth. And for other people, I think that there are times when people are definitely deceived in the truth. You know, they see one thing, but it's really another. And I think that definitely in some other cases, people are deceived into different truths. But I don't think it's our place to just go up to them and be like, what you believe is just false and terrible and you need to believe this. You know, I think that there's a point where we can help them see the truth that we believe is true. And without just going at them and telling them everything you believe is wrong. Even though we may think that, so I think that there's a way in helping them see truth if they're deceived. And you know what? If they choose not to believe the truth that we believe is true, then that's not our fault and it's not on us. Yes.
So, if from our standpoint we think Christianity is the true religion, then is religion in everyone else's mind their religion? Is it purely mental, or is it like, is all religions just a mental state of mind that you choose to set your mind in, or is it there, like how, like in your paper you said that there's no way to really prove it's mostly by faith, but if everyone had faith in different things, then is religion just mental?
That's a great question. I think that for a lot of people it can be. There are a lot of people who live their life and that's just how they live it, and that's how they see things, and it oftentimes just changes our perspectives and our view of the world. But to me, as a Christian, my faith is very real. It's not just in my head. It's very much alive, and for me personally, I know and I can say that my God has power, and He's alive, and that, and I think for some people that a religion may be in their heads and it just may be a mental game for them, but I don't think that it's true for all. I wouldn't say that it's just in your head.
So, what makes Christianity not mental versus all other religions?
Yeah, that's fair. Well, just personally, I would say that what makes it not a head game for me is that it's real to me, and that I can see God's power. I can see His power in nature. I can see His power in things that go on in my life, and I think that for me, that's what makes it real, and not simply in my head. Now, but I can't say that for everyone else. I know that there are many Christians who feel that God is alive in their life and working, but I can't say that for all of them. You know, I don't know. I can't speak for everyone who's a Christian. You know, people are just different and they have different experiences, and for some people in the world it may be just in their head, but I don't think that's true for all.
Though, like, from your perspective, it feels real to you, but how you know it is real versus, like, it can feel real to a person, but how do you know it's actually not just in your head?
Yeah. Well, I can see the impact. It has, that happen that I'm like, wow, that has to be God to me. And things that are not in my head, things that happen that I say, wow, that couldn't have happened. I couldn't have willed that in my head to happen, you know? So that's what makes it free.
Ms. Ronda, thank you very much.